In the merciless social theatre of 1818 London, where a young woman's worth was measured in beauty, dowry, and advantageous connections, Elara Vance was considered bankrupt. Her own guardian, the sharp-tongued Lady Beatrice Finch, had declared her fate with chilling certainty. That unfortunate face, those peculiar habits. She is ugly and will never marry. Elara was a shadow, destined to haunt the corners of ballrooms, a permanent wallflower. But no one, least of all her venomous aunt, could have predicted the arrival of Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, a man so desired, so powerful, that his gaze alone could rewrite destinies. And for reasons no one could fathom, his gaze was now fixed on her. Elara Vance learned the language of invisibility early. It was a skill honed in the grand, yet suffocating townhouse at number 20 Hanover Square, under the ever-watchful eye of her aunt, Lady Beatrice Finch. To the London ton, Lady Beatrice was the epitome of grace, a grieving widow who had generously taken in her orphaned niece. In private, her words were not silk, but shards of glass. Do try to pull your shoulders back, Elara. Slouching only accentuates your simplicity, Beatrice would say, her voice a low murmur as they prepared for yet another ball. And for heaven's sake, remove those spectacles. A lady does not advertise her shortcomings. Elara's shortcomings were numerous according to her aunt. Her hair was not the fashionable spun gold of her cousin, Rosamond, but a deep, unruly mahogany that resisted all attempts at taming. She had a light dusting of freckles across her nose, which Beatrice called a common affliction. And worst of all, she was myopic. The world without her spectacles was a soft, beautiful blur. But to navigate it, to read, to study her passions, she needed them. The spectacles, her aunt declared, were the final nail in the coffin of her marriageability. Her true ugliness, however, was her mind. Elara's late father, Professor Elara Vance, had not been a lord, but a celebrated astronomer and academic. He had filled her head not with thoughts of eligible dukes and dress fabrics, but with nebulae, planetary orbits, and the elegant mathematics of the cosmos. After her parents were taken by influenza, Elara's world of star charts and scientific journals was packed away into crates, replaced by needlepoint and etiquette lessons. Her inheritance, a comfortable sum tied to her father's patents on telescopic lenses, was managed by her aunt until she came of age or, hypothetically, married. Beatrice made it clear the latter was an impossibility. "Rosamond, my dear, you are a vision," Beatrice would coo to her own daughter. Rosamond was indeed the ideal of English beauty, blonde, blue-eyed, with a placid smile, and a mind untroubled by anything more complex than the latest gossip from Almack's. She wasn't cruel like her mother, merely a reflection of her upbringing, shallow, entitled, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. "Mother, must Elara accompany us to the Danbury Ball?" Rosamond would whine, wrinkling her perfect nose. "She just stands by the potted ferns. It's embarrassing." "Propriety demands it, my love," Beatrice would reply, her eyes flicking to Elara. "We must show that we have made every effort. No one can say we did not try to find a place for the poor, plain thing." The Danbury Ball was to be the pinnacle of the season. Everyone who mattered would be there. Its primary attraction was the expected appearance of Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. The Duke was a legend cloaked in mystery. Fabulously wealthy since birth, he had spent years abroad on scientific and archaeological expeditions after distinguishing himself at Waterloo. He was said to be impossibly handsome, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. More intimidatingly, he was brilliant, a member of the Royal Society, a published scholar, and a man who suffered fools not at all. He had returned to England a year ago, and had, thus far, shown no interest in any of the debutantes paraded before him, a fact that only intensified their desire. For Elara, the evening was a predictable torment, dressed in a drab grey muslin that Beatrice had chosen to minimize her presence. She stood in her designated spot near a wilting palm. She had removed her spectacles as ordered, and the ballroom was a kaleidoscope of shimmering colours and indistinct faces. The music of the string quartet felt miles away. Her aunt's voice cut through the haze. "Lord Pemberley, may I present my daughter, Rosamond Finch, and this is my niece, Miss Elara Vance." The Viscount, a florid man with a wandering eye, gave Rosamond a lavish bow and barely glanced at Elara before turning his back on her. It was a familiar, stinging humiliation. Elara retreated further into the shadows, her gloved fingers tracing the patterns on her reticule. It was in that moment of near total obscurity that a voice, low and resonant, spoke from just behind her. "Hiding from the fray, Miss Vance." A wise decision. Elara started, turning so quickly she nearly stumbled. The man who had spoken was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored black coat that made every other gentleman in the room look like a preening popinjay. His shoulders were broad, and his dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run a hand through it in frustration. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the colour of dark grey storm clouds, intelligent and startlingly direct. Even in the blurry world without her glasses, his focus was absolute. She knew, with a jolt that ran through her entire being, that this was the Duke of Blackwood. She curtsied, her cheeks burning. "Your Grace, I was not hiding. I was observing." A faint, intriguing smile touched his lips. "Observing what, precisely? The mating rituals of the English aristocracy?" The unexpected wit caught her off guard. A genuine, unbidden smile bloomed on her face. "Something like that. It is a rather predictable orbit of flattery, ambition, and desperation." His eyebrows rose in surprise, and for the first time that night Elara felt seen. Not as a poor, plain thing, but as a person. An astronomical analogy, he mused, his gaze sweeping over her, missing nothing. He noted the way she held herself, the intelligence in her posture that fought against her forced timidity. "You have an interest in the sciences?" Before she could answer, Lady Beatrice materialized at her side, her face a mask of horrified pleasantry. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you. Forgive my niece, she is unaccustomed to such esteemed company. Elara, you are monopolizing the Duke." Alistair's gaze turned to Lady Beatrice, and a subtle chill entered his expression. "On the contrary, Lady Finch, Miss Vance and I were just beginning a fascinating conversation. You say she is unaccustomed to my company? Then we must remedy that at once." He turned back to a stunned Elara and extended his gloved hand. "Miss Vance, would you do me the honour of this waltz?" A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. Rosamond's mouth fell open. Lady Beatrice looked as if she had been struck. The Duke of Blackwood, who had not danced with a single debutante all season, was asking the ugly, invisible Elara Vance to dance. Her mind screamed no, terrified of the spectacle, of her own clumsiness. But her heart, a foolish, rebellious thing, whispered yes. She placed her trembling hand in his. "I would be honoured, Your Grace," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. As he led her onto the dance floor, the world came into sharp, terrifying focus. The journey from the potted fern to the centre of the ballroom was the longest walk of Elara's life. Every eye in the room was on them. She could feel their disbelief, their scorn, their pity. She heard the whispers, sharp as needles. Blackwood? With her? Is it a wager? The Finch girl must be mortified. Her hand was trembling in the Duke's firm, warm grasp. Her feet felt like lead. She was going to trip. She was going to disgrace herself and him. "Breathe, Miss Vance." Alistair's voice was a low anchor in the storm of her panic. He guided her into the opening steps of the waltz. "And look at me. Pay them no mind. They are merely background noise." She forced her gaze up to his. His grey eyes were calm and steady, a safe harbour. The blur of the ballroom receded, and there was only him and the music. He was an expert dancer, leading her with an effortless strength that made her feel surprisingly graceful. Her steps, drilled into her by a frustrated dancing master, began to flow naturally. "You called their courtship an orbit," he said, his voice easily audible over the music. "Expand on that." The question was so unexpected, so blessedly different from the banal small talk of the ballroom, that it shocked her out of her self-consciousness. "Well," she began, her mind clicking into a familiar, comfortable rhythm. "The most desirable gentlemen are like suns. The young ladies are the planets, trapped in their gravitational pull. They vie for the most favourable position, the closest orbit, hoping to be captured and turned into a moon." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his handsome features into something breathtaking. "A brilliant, if cynical, assessment. And which planet are you, Miss Vance?" "Oh, I am not a planet," she said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I am a distant asteroid, long ago flung from the system, observing from the cold and quiet of deep space." He considered her words, his expression unreadable. "The Kuiper Belt is not empty, Miss Vance. It is filled with fascinating, undiscovered worlds. Perhaps it is a far more interesting place to be than in a predictable, circular path." The dance ended far too soon. As the final notes of the music faded, the polite applause felt like a judgment. Alistair bowed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you. That was the most interesting dance I have had in a decade." He escorted her not back to her aunt, but toward the French doors leading to the terrace. "A moment of air," he stated, a command disguised as a suggestion. The cool night air was a relief. The distant sounds of the city provided a backdrop to the quiet garden. Elara finally felt she could breathe again. She instinctively reached into her reticule and pulled out her spectacles, sliding them on. The world snapped into glorious, sharp-edged clarity. She saw the intricate veins on the ivy leaves climbing to the trellis, the individual stars beginning to prick the velvety London sky. Alistair watched her, a curious expression on his face. "Your aunt does not approve of those, I take it." Elara's cheeks flushed. "She considers them an impediment." "An impediment to what? Seeing the world as it truly is?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain for the unseen aunt. "Tell me, Miss Vance, from where do you get your astronomical knowledge?" The question opened a door inside her that had been locked for years. She spoke of her father, of his observatory in their small country home, of the nights they spent charting constellations. She spoke of the Orion Nebula, of the Galilean moons of Jupiter, of the crushing disappointment when her father's research had been packed away. She spoke with a passion and intelligence that had long been suppressed, her shyness melting away under his focused attention. Alistair listened, not with polite interest, but with the keen focus of a fellow scholar. He asked pointed questions about lens-grinding techniques and the calculation of parallax. They were not a duke and a wallflower. They were two minds meeting on a plane far removed from the ballroom behind them. "Your father was Elara Vance," he stated, a note of revelation in his voice. "I've read his papers on stellar cartography. He was a genius. His work was foundational. Tears pricked Elara's eyes. To hear her father spoken of with such reverence by a man like this, it was a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. "He was," she whispered. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp, brittle voice of Lady Beatrice. "Elara, there you are. You have been gone an unconscionable amount of time. The Duke must be weary of your chatter." Alistair turned slowly. His formidable height and the sheer force of his presence seemed to diminish Lady Beatrice. "On the contrary," he said, his voice dangerously smooth. "I find Miss Vance's chatter to be a rare gem in a mountain of gravel. We were just discussing her father's work." He then fixed his gaze on Beatrice. "It is a tragedy that his daughter, who clearly inherited his intellect, has not been encouraged to continue it." The veiled criticism was unmistakable. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened until it was a bloodless line. "Elara has her duties as a young lady. We cannot all be lost in the clouds." "Some of us prefer the clouds to the mud," Alistair retorted. He bowed to Elara. "Thank you for the conversation, Miss Vance. It was the highlight of my evening." He then gave Lady Beatrice a curt nod and strode back into the ballroom, leaving silence in his wake. The carriage ride home was glacial. Rosamond was weeping hysterically. "He didn't even look at me. He danced with her. Everyone is laughing at me." Beatrice, however, was quiet. It was a terrifying, coiled silence. When they arrived back at Hanover Square, she followed Elara to her room. "What did you do?" she hissed, closing the door behind them. "I did nothing," Elara said, her voice shaking but firm. "You threw yourself at him. You schemed. You connived. You think a little talk of stars will capture a duke?" Her aunt advanced on her, her face contorted with a rage that was shocking in its intensity. "Let me make this clear. You are nothing. You are a plain, penniless burden I was saddled with. The Duke was amusing himself with you, like a man toying with a stray kitten before he kicks it aside. Do not for one moment believe you are special. You will end up a spinster, a dependent in this house forever. I will see to it." The venom in her aunt's words was meant to break her, and it almost did. But as Elara lay in her bed that night, replaying the evening, it wasn't her aunt's cruelty that echoed in her mind. It was the Duke's voice, his respectful questions, the way his eyes had crinkled when he smiled. It was the memory of feeling, for the first time in years, not like an ugly asteroid, but like an undiscovered world. And for that feeling, she realized, she was willing to fight. The morning after the Danbury Ball, London awoke to a singular, astonishing piece of gossip. The Duke of Blackwood had shown a marked preference for Miss Elara Vance. The Ton was in an uproar. Wagers were laid at White's Club. Matrons whispered behind their fans. How could the season's greatest prize fix his attention on a nonentity, a girl known only for her plainness and her formidable aunt? At Hanover Square, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken fury. Lady Beatrice greeted Elara at breakfast with a look of pure loathing. A large bouquet of exquisite hothouse orchids sat on the sideboard. The card bore the Duke of Blackwood's crest. "An ostentatious display," Beatrice sniffed, pushing the flowers aside as if they were offensive. "He is merely being polite after your shameless display last night. Do not read anything into it." But it was difficult not to. Later that morning, as the ladies of the house prepared for their daily promenade in Hyde Park, another message arrived. A footman in the Blackwood livery delivered an invitation for Miss Vance to join the Duke for a visit to the British Museum the following day. It was not an invitation for a group. It was for her alone, with her aunt, of course, as chaperone. "Absolutely not," Beatrice declared, crumpling the thick parchment in her hand. "But, mother," Rosamond whined, her eyes wide with a mixture of jealousy and awe. To refuse the Duke, it would be a scandal. Beatrice was caught. To refuse would be a direct snub, drawing even more attention to the situation. To accept was to sanction this madness. With a look that promised retribution, she penned a tight-lipped acceptance. The visit to the museum was an exercise in exquisite torture for Lady Beatrice, and a quiet revelation for Elara. The Duke ignored his chaperone almost entirely. He led Elara not to the fashionable sculpture galleries, but to the collection of scientific instruments, astrolabes, orreries, and early telescopes. He spoke to her as an equal, discussing the merits of Gregorian versus Newtonian reflector telescopes. He listened intently as she pointed out a flaw in the gearing of a large clockwork model of the solar system, a detail no one else would have noticed. "You see it too," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "I've been arguing with the curator about it for weeks. He insists it is historically accurate. I insist it is mechanically flawed." "It is," Elara affirmed, pushing her spectacles up her nose to see better. "The tertiary gear for Mars is misaligned. It would cause the planet to lag by approximately 4 degrees over a decade of rotation." Alistair simply stared at her for a long moment, a slow, appreciative smile dawning on his face. Lady Beatrice, utterly lost and bored, tapped her foot impatiently nearby. This was the pattern of his courtship. It was utterly unconventional. There were no whispered sweet nothings in moonlit gardens. Instead, there were packages from bookstores containing the latest scientific papers from the continent. There was a public walk in the park where, instead of admiring the flowers, he and Elara debated the principles of botany. He solicited her opinion on a new lens he was having ground for his private observatory at his country estate, Blackwood Manor. With every interaction, Elara felt herself unfurling. The confidence her father had nurtured, so long dormant, began to re-emerge. She started to voice her opinions more freely, her shyness receding in the face of his genuine interest. She even began to see a flicker of a different person in the mirror. Perhaps her hair wasn't unfashionable. It was rich and complex. Perhaps her spectacles were not an impediment, but a sign of a focused mind. The ton remained baffled. They saw only the Duke spending time with the ugly niece. They could not hear their conversations, could not comprehend the meeting of their minds. Lady Beatrice, however, understood perfectly. She saw that this was not a whim. The Duke was serious, and that terrified her. Her narrative, the story of poor, plain Elara, who would be dependent on her aunt's charity forever, was crumbling. With it, her control over Elara's inheritance was threatened. She escalated her campaign. "I hear the most distressing things, Elara," she would say at the dinner table. "Lady Jersey says you looked positively dowdy at the opera. She said the Duke must have a peculiar taste for charity cases." She enlisted the help of Lord Peregrine Harrington, a caddish nobleman with a crumbling estate who had been pursuing Rosamond. Harrington was deeply in debt and saw an alliance with Lady Beatrice as a way to secure his future. "The Duke is making a fool of you all," Harrington sneered to Beatrice one afternoon over tea. "He's a radical, everyone knows it. Spends his time with dusty books instead of at the racetrack. He's probably taken her on as some sort of intellectual pet." "We must put a stop to it," Beatrice hissed, her composure cracking, "before he does something foolish, like propose." The word hung in the air, venomous and unthinkable. Harrington's eyes gleamed with malice. "A girl's reputation is a fragile thing, Lady Finch. A whisper in the right ear, a carefully orchestrated misunderstanding. It can be shattered beyond repair." Beatrice looked at him, a dark understanding passing between them. the seeds of a truly vicious plan were sown. Unaware of the plotting, Elara's world was expanding. One afternoon, Alistair invited her and her aunt to his London residence, Beaumont House, to view a rare manuscript he had acquired. The library was a 2-story marvel, a sanctuary of wood, leather, and knowledge. Elara felt more at home there than she ever had at Hanover Square. As she was examining the manuscript, Alistair quietly came to stand beside her. "I knew your father, Elara," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips was both shocking and wonderful. She looked up, startled. "You did?" "Not well. I was a young man at Cambridge. He delivered a guest lecture. I was captivated. He spoke of the universe as a grand, unsolved equation waiting for someone with the courage to read it. After the lecture, I approached him with a question. He spent an hour with me, a mere undergraduate, treating my ideas with gravity and respect. He is the reason I pursued my own scientific interests with such passion. When I heard his name was Vance, and that he had a daughter, I confess I sought you out at the Danbury Ball. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something deeper, more profound. It was a connection forged years ago, through a shared love of knowledge, passed from her father to this incredible man, and now back to her. He hadn't seen a wallflower. He had seen Alaric Vance's daughter, and had hoped to find a kindred spirit. And he had. The realization stole her breath away. This wasn't pity. It wasn't a game. It was real. As he escorted them out, he paused at the door. "My country estate, Blackwood Manor, has one of the finest private observatories in England. I am hosting a small gathering of scholars and friends there in a fortnight. I would be honored if you and your aunt would attend." His eyes were fixed on Elara, but the invitation was a public declaration, a weekend at his country home. It was a clear, unmistakable sign of his intentions. As the carriage pulled away from Beaumont House, Elara felt a soaring hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. But beside her, Lady Beatrice was unnaturally still, her face pale, her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. It was the look of a cornered animal, and Elara knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that her aunt was about to strike. The 2 weeks leading up to the weekend at Blackwood Manor were a strange mixture of dream and nightmare for Elara. The dream was Alistair, his daily visits, the books he sent, the quiet, shared understanding that grew between them. It was a world of light and intellectual discovery. He made her feel not just seen, but celebrated. For the first time, she began to imagine a future for herself, a life filled with learning, respect, and perhaps even love. The nightmare was Lady Beatrice. Her aunt's animosity had curdled from sharp-tongued disdain into a simmering, silent malevolence. She no longer made overt insults. Instead, she employed a more insidious form of cruelty. She would accidentally spill tea on the new dress Elara was having made for the country visit. She would intercept a package from the Duke and misplace it. She began a subtle but vicious whisper campaign among her circle of gossips. Poor Elara. She would sigh to her friends at a card party. She is so naive. She doesn't understand that the Duke is merely indulging a whim. It is a great cruelty on his part to raise her hopes so. She has always had fancies, a delicate constitution of the mind, inherited from her father's side, you understand. The whispers spread like a contagion. Elara Vance was not just plain. She was peculiar, unstable. The Duke was toying with her. It was all a grand, cruel joke. Elara felt the shift in the way people looked at her. The curiosity was now tinged with pity and scorn, but her burgeoning confidence, bolstered by Alistair's steadfast attention, allowed her to weather it. She was beginning to understand that her aunt's opinion was not a reflection of her worth, but of her aunt's own twisted nature. The arrival at Blackwood Manor was like stepping into another world. The estate was a sprawling masterpiece of Palladian architecture set amidst rolling hills and ancient forests. But for Elara, the main attraction was the gleaming white dome of the observatory, situated on a hill overlooking the house. The other guests were not the usual frivolous members of the ton. They were astronomers, botanists, philosophers, and intelligent, forward-thinking ladies. Here, Elara's knowledge was not a shortcoming, but an asset. She found herself drawn into lively debates, her opinions sought and respected. Alistair was the perfect host, but his attention was clearly centered on her. On the second evening, after dinner, he led her away from the other guests, up the winding path to the observatory. The interior was even more magnificent than she had imagined. A massive brass telescope dominated the space, aimed at the star-dusted sky through the open slit in the dome. The air smelled of metal, oil, and old paper. It was the scent of her childhood, the scent of home. "My father would have loved this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I had it built with men like him in mind," Alistair said, his voice soft beside her. He guided her to the eyepiece. "Look, I believe I have found something that will interest you." She peered through the lens. Floating in the inky blackness was the majestic, swirling gas cloud of the Orion Nebula, her father's favorite celestial object. But Alistair had calibrated the telescope to a much higher magnification than she had ever seen. The detail was breathtaking. She could see the intricate filaments of gas and the cluster of newly born stars at its heart, the trapezium, shining like a handful of diamonds. It's magnificent," she breathed. "I have a theory," he said, moving to stand close behind her, his warmth a comforting presence at her back. "About a potential fifth star in the trapezium cluster. The gravitational calculations are complex. I thought perhaps you might be willing to look over my notes." He was not just showing her his world, he was inviting her into it. He was offering her a partnership, a collaboration of minds. In that moment, surrounded by the silent, watching stars, the last of Elara's insecurities fell away. She turned to face him, her face illuminated by the faint starlight filtering into the dome. "Alistair," she began, her voice steady. "Why me?" He looked down at her, his handsome face serious, his grey eyes searching hers. "Because when I look at you, Elara, I do not see what your aunt wants the world to see. I see a mind that burns brighter than any star in this telescope. I see a strength you don't even know you possess. I see the woman I have been searching for my entire life, without even knowing I was searching." He gently reached up and removed her spectacles, not to hide them, but to see her more clearly. He traced the line of her cheekbone with his thumb. "They call you plain. I call you beautiful. Because beauty that is only skin, deep fades. But this," he tapped his temple, then his heart, "this is eternal." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a passionate, demanding kiss, but one of tender discovery, of recognition. It was a promise of shared futures, of late-night discoveries, of a life lived in partnership. When he pulled away, Elara was breathless, her heart soaring. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice a low murmur, "when we return to London, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Alistair. Yes." They stayed in the observatory for another hour, talking of the future, of the research they would conduct together, of the life they would build. It was the most perfect night of Elara's life. But as they walked back down the hill towards the brightly lit manor house, neither of them could know that back in London, Lord Harrington was paying a visit to a disgraced alcoholic forger in a grimy back alley, or that Lady Beatrice was carefully composing a letter to a solicitor, filled with vicious lies about her niece's mental instability and moral failings. The plot was in motion. The trap was about to be sprung. The return to London was triumphant. Alistair formally called on Lady Beatrice the very next day to request Elara's hand in marriage. Beatrice, trapped by propriety and the Duke's formidable presence, could do nothing but give her consent through gritted teeth. The engagement of the Duke of Blackwood to Miss Elara Vance was announced in the Morning Post. The news exploded like a cannonball. The Tun, ever fickle, immediately changed its tune. If the most discerning duke in England had chosen Miss Vance, then there must be more to her than met the eye. Suddenly, Elara was not plain, but possessed of an unconventional, intelligent beauty. Her quiet nature was not dull, but enigmatic and deep. Invitations poured into Hanover Square. Dressmakers flocked to offer their services. Elara found the sudden reversal both absurd and overwhelming. Alistair shielded her from the worst of it. He was a constant, steady presence. He took her to lectures at the Royal Society, where her insightful questions earned her nods of respect from learned men. He commissioned a portrait of her, insisting she wear her spectacles, telling the artist, "I want you to capture her as she is, brilliant and clear-sighted." For a few short weeks, Elara lived in a state of unbelievable happiness. Even Rosamond seemed to thaw slightly, impressed by the magnificent diamond ring Alistair had given Elara, and the sheer social power of being the future Duchess's cousin. But Lady Beatrice was merely biding her time. Her trap had been carefully laid, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to spring it. The occasion she chose was a grand ball she herself was hosting, ostensibly to celebrate the engagement. It was to be the social event of the season, a public showcase of her niece's triumph, and the stage for her downfall. The night of the ball, Hanover Square was ablaze with light. Elara descended the grand staircase, a vision in a gown of deep sapphire silk that matched her eyes. For the first time, she felt truly beautiful, not because of the dress, but because of the confidence Alistair had given her. He was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and the look of pure adoration on his face swept away any lingering doubts. The ballroom was packed. As the future Duchess of Blackwood, Elara was the centre of attention. Those who had scorned her now fawned over her. It was a dizzying, surreal experience. The trap was sprung just after midnight. Lord Harrington, looking unusually sober and self-important, made his way to the centre of the room and called for silence. A hush fell over the crowd. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing with false solemnity. "It is with a heavy heart that I must perform a painful duty. Information has come to my attention that concerns the honour of a great house and the well-being of a respected peer." He turned to look at Alistair and Elara, who stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor. "The Duke of Blackwood," Harrington continued, "is a man of unimpeachable character, which is why it is so tragic that he has been the victim of a most cruel and calculating deception." From his pocket, he produced a small bound packet of letters. These letters, written in Miss Vance's own hand, prove that she has not been an innocent party in this courtship. They detail a sordid and long-standing affair with her former tutor, a Mr. Thomas Gable, an affair that began long before the Duke ever entered the picture. Gasps of shock filled the room. Elara stared, horrified. "That's not true. I've never written those." "The letters speak for themselves," Harrington said smugly. He handed one to a nearby lord. "Read it. The descriptions are vivid." The letter was passed from hand to hand, guests murmuring in horrified delight at the scandalous contents. They were filled with passionate declarations and intimate details, all seemingly penned by Elara to this unknown tutor. "Where is this Mr. Gable?" someone shouted. "He has conveniently disappeared," Harrington said. "No doubt paid off with a portion of the inheritance Miss Vance schemed to secure by entrapping the Duke." Just then, Lady Beatrice stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I am so sorry," she sobbed, addressing Alistair directly. "I tried to warn you. I saw her instability, her flights of fancy. I never knew it went this far. My poor, misguided niece. Her mind is not her own. Her father, the professor, also suffered from delusions in his later years. It seems the affliction is hereditary." It was a masterstroke of villainy. In a single blow they had not only accused Elara of being immoral and deceitful, but also of being insane. They had poisoned not just her present, but her past and her future. All eyes turned to Elara. Her face was ashen. The room spun around her. It was a lie, a monstrous, impossible lie. She looked at Alistair, her heart shattering into a million pieces. His face was a thunderous mask of stone. He looked from the letters, to her, to the weeping Lady Beatrice. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the Duke to denounce his tainted fiancée, to cast her aside. Alistair looked at Elara, his grey eyes unreadable. He saw her terror, her desperate plea for him to believe her. He saw her aunt's false sorrow, and Harrington's triumphant smirk. Slowly, deliberately, he took Elara's arm and tucked it into his. He turned to face the stunned assembly. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade of ice. "This ball is over," he commanded. "Leave my house." He had not called it Lady Beatrice's house. He had called it his house. It was a subtle but powerful claim. The guests, shocked and confused, began to shuffle out, eager to spread the news of the scandal of the century. Alistair led Elara from the ballroom, leaving Lady Beatrice and Lord Harrington standing amidst the wilting flowers and dying candles of their supposed triumph. As they walked through the now empty hall, Elara's composure finally broke. Sobs racked her body. "Alistair, I swear to you," she wept. "I don't know who that man is. I never wrote those letters." He stopped and turned her to face him, gently cupping her face in his hands. He looked into her tear-filled eyes. "Elara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know." She stared at him, bewildered. You believe me?" "Of course I believe you," he said, a flicker of righteous anger in his eyes. "I know your mind. I know your heart. And I know a forgery when I see one. The handwriting is good, but the turn of phrase is not yours. You would never use such a clumsy metaphor to describe the moon. Now, tell me everything you know about Mr. Thomas Gable." Elara shook her head, confused. "He was my mathematics tutor. He was dismissed over 3 years ago. Aunt Beatrice accused him of stealing a silver letter opener. He swore he was innocent, but she had him sent away in disgrace." Alistair's expression hardened. "And now we know why. She needed a plausible name for her little fiction, and a disgraced man who has disappeared is the perfect candidate. She has been planning this for a long time." He pulled her into a fierce embrace. "This is not over, my love. They wanted to ruin you. Instead, they have just declared war on me, and that is a war they will not win." The days following the disastrous ball were the darkest Elara had ever known. Though Alistair believed her, The rest of the world did not. The scandal was on everyone's lips. The newspapers, without naming names directly, wrote salacious articles about a deceitful debutante and a duped duke. She was a pariah. The invitations stopped. When she dared to venture out in the carriage, she was met with hostile stares and gleeful whispers. She was trapped in the house at Hanover Square, a prisoner with her jailer. Lady Beatrice was a study in feigned sympathy and private triumph. In front of the servants, she would sigh and speak of Elara's illness. In private, her cruelty was absolute. "You see?" she sneered at Elara one evening as her niece sat staring blankly out the window. "I told you what you were. He may be standing by you for now, out of some misguided sense of honor. But it will not last. The pressure will be too great. No man, not even a duke, will shackle himself to a ruined, mad woman. You will be left with nothing and no one. Just as I always said." Rosamond, confused and frightened by the intensity of the scandal, simply avoided Elara altogether. The house that had once been a gilded cage was now a true prison, cold and silent. Alistair, however, was a man of his word. He sent her notes daily, filled not with pity, but with strategy and reassurance. He was forbidden from visiting by a triumphant Lady Beatrice, who claimed it would be improper under the circumstances. But his people were at work. He had hired investigators, the best in London, to dig into the lives of Lord Harrington and the forger, and to find the missing tutor, Thomas Gable. "Patience, my love," he wrote. "The truth is a stubborn thing. It will out." But as days turned into a week, Elara's hope began to fray. Beatrice's words were like acid, eating away at her confidence. What if Alistair couldn't prove her innocence? What if society never accepted her? Was it fair to subject him to a lifetime of scandal and suspicion? The doubts, planted so long ago by her aunt, began to resurface. The lowest point came when her only friend, the shy but kind Lady Cordelia, sent a note. It was a stilted, formal letter breaking off their friendship, stating that her father forbade her from associating with Elara. Reading the carefully penned words, Elara felt a profound sense of isolation. Her aunt had truly succeeded in cutting her off from the world. That night, she sat in the dark, her engagement ring feeling heavy and cold on her finger. She considered taking it off, writing a letter to Alistair releasing him from their engagement. It would be the honorable thing to do, to save him from her ruin. She loved him too much to see his name dragged through the mud beside hers. As she reached for a pen, there was a soft knock on her door. A housemaid entered, her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Vance," she whispered. "There is a man at the back service entrance. He says he must speak with you. He says his name is Gable." Elara's heart stopped. Thomas Gable. He was here. She hurried down the dark servants' staircase to the back of the house. There, huddled in the shadows of the alley, was a thin, haggard man with terrified eyes. It was her former tutor, looking years older than she remembered. "Miss Vance," he stammered, twisting a worn cap in his hands. I had to come. I read about the scandal. What they're saying about you. About those letters. It's my fault." "What do you mean?" Elara urged, pulling him further into the shadows. "When your aunt dismissed me," he explained, his voice trembling, "she did not just send me away. She threatened me. She told me she had proof that I had been making improper advances towards you. It was a lie, of course. But she said if I ever came back to London, if I ever tried to find work as a tutor again, she would use it to destroy me. And then, a few weeks ago, a man, Lord Harrington, found me. He gave me money. A lot of money. He told me to disappear, to go to America. He said it was for my own good. Gable wrung his hands. But my conscience, I couldn't do it. To let them ruin you with a lie that started with me. I couldn't live with it. I'm not a brave man, Miss Vance, but I am not a monster. Elara's mind raced. This was it. This was the proof. But Gable was terrified. Harrington and her aunt would crush him. "You did the right thing, Mr. Gable," she said, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. The despair she had felt moments ago was burned away by a surge of cold, clear anger. "But you cannot stay here. They will find you. You must go to this address." She scribbled the address of Beaumont House on a scrap of paper. "Give this to the butler. Say that you have come on behalf of Project Orion. The Duke will understand. He will protect you." After Gable had scurried away into the night, Elara returned to her room. She did not write a letter releasing Alistair. Instead, she sat down and began to write something else. She detailed every cruel word, every act of sabotage, every subtle manipulation her aunt had used against her for years. She wrote about the control of her inheritance, the constant undermining of her confidence, the methodical campaign to ensure she would never marry. She was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. She was gathering her own ammunition for the final battle. The storm was no longer just gathering, it was about to break. Alistair acted swiftly. Thomas Gable was secured, his testimony documented by a solicitor. His investigators confirmed the large payment from Lord Harrington and traced the forger, who, in exchange for having his own considerable debts cleared, was willing to confess his role in the scheme. The Duke now held all the pieces. All that remained was to choose the board on which the final game would be played. He did not choose a courtroom or a drawing room. He chose the one place that symbolized both the old world of aristocratic power and the new world of knowledge, the Royal Society. He arranged for a special evening lecture, ostensibly on his latest astronomical findings. He sent personal invitations to every influential peer, every powerful matron, every notable gossip in London. He also sent a special, non-negotiable invitation to Lady Beatrice Finch, Lord Harrington, and Rosamond. To refuse to attend an event hosted by a duke at the prestigious society would be an unthinkable social slight. They walked into his trap, confident that he was making a desperate, last-ditch attempt to salvage his own reputation. The lecture hall was filled to capacity. An expectant hush fell as the Duke of Blackwood, looking impossibly calm and commanding, strode to the lectern. Lady Beatrice and Harrington sat in the front row, looking smug. Elara, at Alistair's insistence, sat slightly to the side of the stage, pale but resolute. Alistair began his lecture, speaking of stellar parallax and the vast distances of the cosmos. He was a captivating speaker, and for 20 minutes the audience was enthralled. Then he paused, taking a sip of water. "Knowledge," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, "is the pursuit of truth. It is the shining of a light into darkness to expose what is real. But sometimes, darkness is not a simple absence of light. Sometimes it is actively and maliciously created. Tonight, I wish to speak to you about a different kind of darkness, one found not in the depths of space, but in the heart of London." He turned his piercing gaze directly on Lady Beatrice and Lord Harrington. "You have all heard the vile rumours concerning my fiancée, Miss Elara Vance. You have been told she is a woman of loose morals, of unsound mind, a deceiver. Tonight, we will bring the truth to light." He proceeded, with the cold, irrefutable precision of a scientist laying out a proof, to dismantle their entire plot. He called forth a shaking Mr. Gable, who recounted Lady Beatrice's original threat and Lord Harrington's bribe. He presented the forger's signed and witnessed confession, complete with handwriting samples, showing his ability to mimic Elara's script. He produced financial records that showed Lord Harrington was on the brink of ruin, and that Lady Beatrice had been systematically embezzling funds from Elara's inheritance for years, providing a clear motive for why she needed her niece to remain unmarried and under her control. With each piece of evidence, the crowd grew more and more silent, their expressions turning from titillation to shock and then to outrage. Lady Beatrice's face had gone from smug to ashen white. Harrington was sweating profusely, his eyes darting towards the exit. "This is not a story of a fallen woman," Alistair thundered, his voice ringing with authority. "This is the story of a brilliant young mind, deliberately and cruelly suppressed. It is the story of a woman who was told she was ugly because her intelligence shone too brightly, who was told she was worthless because her guardian coveted her worth. They sought to shatter her reputation. They failed. They sought to break her spirit. They failed." He then turned and walked to Elara, taking her hand and leading her to the front of the stage. She stood tall, her spectacles firmly in place, meeting the gaze of the assembly without flinching. "The greatest deception here," Alistair said, his voice softening as he looked at Elara, "was the lie that this woman was anything less than extraordinary. Her only instability is an unstable tolerance for fools. Her only deception is in hiding the true depth of her brilliance from a world that was not ready for it." He looked back at the crowd. "Lady Beatrice Finch and Lord Harrington have committed fraud, slander, and conspiracy. The legal consequences will be severe. But their social consequence," he said, his voice dropping to a glacial calm, "begins now." It was over. Lady Beatrice fainted, though no one rushed to help her. Lord Harrington made a bolt for the door, only to be stopped by two grim-faced men Alistair had posted there. Rosamond sat alone, weeping, finally understanding the true nature of the mother she had so admired. Alistair led Elara from the hall, away from the recriminations and the dawning horror on the faces of the ton. He took her home, not to Hanover Square, but to Beaumont House. Later that night, he took her up to the small observatory on the roof. The city below was a distant murmur. "There is one last thing I wanted to show you," he said, guiding her to the telescope. "It's a new discovery, a comet, faint but growing brighter every night." Elara peered into the eyepiece. There, against the familiar backdrop of stars, was a faint, fuzzy smudge of light with a ghostly tail. It was beautiful, unexpected, and utterly new. "A comet," she whispered in awe. "Has it been named?" "Not yet," Alistair said, his arms coming around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I thought, given that its trajectory is unconventional and its brilliance took everyone by surprise, we might name it Comet Vance Beaumont." Elara laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. She turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss filled with gratitude, triumph, and a deep, abiding love. The jealous aunt, the scornful society, the carefully crafted lies, they were all just distant, fading background noise. Here, under the vast, star-filled sky, with the man who saw her true self, she was finally home. She was not an ugly asteroid. She was a brilliant comet, just beginning her journey across the heavens. And so, Elara Vance, the woman branded ugly and unworthy, found her worth not in the eyes of a judgmental society, but in the heart of a man who valued truth and intelligence above all else. Theirs was a love story, written not in the pages of a gossip column, but in the stars themselves. It's a powerful reminder that true beauty isn't about conforming to the standards of others, but about having the courage to be unapologetically yourself. The cruel words of the jealous and the insecure are fleeting, but the light of a brilliant mind and a kind heart can illuminate the darkness, and just like a comet, leave a trail of wonder for all to see. If Elara and Alistair's story of love against all odds captured your heart, please show your support. Like this video to celebrate their triumph. Share it with someone who loves a story where true worth shines through. And subscribe to our channel for more historical dramas that bring the past to life. What part of their journey touched you the most? Let us know in the comments below.